is Lydian, creator of LydD Modules, and this is the first episode of my unscripted, probably unedited, ASMR tutorial series. These are ASMR because I record between like 3 and 4 in the morning, and everyone else in my house is asleep. Today, we're going to be trying, and maybe failing, to explain poppy fields, the first module I made, and maybe the hardest one to try to do this with. Poppy fields is a live fractal generator turned sequencer. If you don't know what a fractal is, you're gonna have to look that up on your own. It's gonna get weird. You'll start by noticing that it's not drawing any pictures on what's obviously a screen, except for this little blue square. That's okay. To render a live fractal, I only do it every 8 frames, but still, it's kind of intensive. Some people's computers may not appreciate that, so when you first load it in, it's not going to draw anything. That's for safety. Click this button. When you hover over it, it will tell you you're on blind lines. This will draw lines as well as this square to represent the sequence that comes out, but it's not going to draw the fractal. If you click the button, now we're in monochrome. This gives you nice black and white. Even if you don't know about fractals, you might have seen this shape before. We'll get into it. The next one gives you colors. I called it flower because the theme, pretty colors. And the next mode is called Buddha Brat. I'm not going to get into what this is, but that is the actual name of this way of rendering a fractal. So look it up if you want to know what it's doing. Let's go back to monochrome, and we'll get into things by moving and zooming. To move moves around the fractal underneath this point you choose, right? By the way, the eye that's by all these Y's is because the vertical axis in fractal math is the imaginary axis. So it's Y imaginary, or Y if you wanna. So we've got X and Y in these stacked knobs. If you move your Y, you move the whole fractal, and you can see the lines. These are the totality of the sequence that would come out if you clocked it, which again we'll get to. So we can move around to various points in the X and Y direction, and we can also zoom in on those points. Of course, that's more fun with colors. Look at that. So we can go to whatever pretty little spot we want, and we can zoom way in on it. Zooming zooms in on the center of the screen, or wherever move is looking at. Wherever the center of this move knob is where you will zoom in on. I have built-in buttons to help with navigation that we'll also get into later. Let's go back out. We're back out at 0. We can move and zoom. We can change the graphics. Soil. No, hold on. I called this poppy fields because conceptually we can think about this fractal as high level, like a topographical map of 2-dimensional sequences, a technically infinite topographical map of sequences, or like a field of flowers where every sequence is like a flower you pick. Because of the recursive and infinite nature of fractals, the field of flowers is itself also a flower. We'll get into it. To start, you pick a flower from a spot on the field by moving the soil. You're picking what soil you want to grab the flower from. And so as you move this around, your main blue dot changes to show you your starting point, or where you're picking the flower from, the starting point of your sequence. So you can choose anywhere on the map. And so then you move around, and that moves the fractal, moves the field underneath where you're picking. When you zoom in, this movement is capped to the edges of the screen, so you can get some more fine control. Because the move knob has to move across the whole fractal, it gets a little finicky when you're zoomed in. But, you know, it kind of has to be that way. So we can move to different areas and choose different flowers. Again, I'm not going to get into a lot of stuff about fractal math, but really quick, you'll notice as long as you're inside the fractal, which is easiest to tell when you're in monochrome, as long as you're inside the fractal, your sequence will stay bounded. It will go from either one point or to a few points, but it'll kind of stay in a cycle. If you're outside the fractal, that's when stuff starts getting really weird. Inside, stable. Outside, unstable. Fractal stuff. Next, we have petals. The petals is like the exponent in the fractal math. So if we come over here to these little notes, the basic Mandelbrot fractal is z prime equals z to the power of n plus c, or in normal human English, the next location equals your last location to some power you pick, usually 2, plus your starting location. So wherever you started has a huge impact. That's why moving soil changes your entire sequence. Petals is what power you take your location to. In normal power of 2 squaring, you get your normal Mandelbrot fractal, like you'd expect. As you change this, the fractal blooms out of itself, and your field becomes a flower. Ta-da! See, look, the whole freaking concept. Ooh, concepts. This also changes lots of things. Besides inherently moving the shape of your sequence and therefore the voltages that come out, it does also slightly expand the sequence. Like, there's a triangle here. If you were able to find that shape in a lower exponent, you'd get a lower set of notes. It's a little finicky, but it shifts things as well as physically moving them around. And then finally, well, not finally at all, but finally for the main set of knobs, you have your Z controls, or your mutagens. Z being what I said here was your location and your last location. Really, deeper than that, it is the center point of the fractal. It is the 0 point. I'll explain that by these are both 0 right now, and the fractal is normal. When you take 0 to any power, you get 0, and then when you add in your starting location, you're left with your starting location. So the first iteration of the fractal math, when your center point is 0, your very, very first point before you've done any iterations is 0. You get the normal Mandelbrot fractal, but it doesn't have to be 0. It can be anything, and that also changes lots of stuff and makes things real weird. It physically mutates the fractal, or the soil in the field that you're picking flowers from. Notice, however, that made a triangle, and even all the way out here, when it looks like the fractal has disappeared into dust, that triangle sequence is still there. This triangle, it's going to have the same audible shape, but these are going to be different notes than this triangle, because the mutagens don't just move things around, they will also mutate your outputs. So now, we can move around the fractal, we can zoom into the fractal, we can change what point on the fractal we start with, we can mutate the fractal, and we can expand it within itself. Lots and lots of stuff. And that's just fractal 1 of 6. Before we get much further in, we need to get some noise going. Because, God, it's been like 10 minutes already. So, we're gonna get a quick cameo from my clock, and I'm gonna explain nothing about it. And then we're gonna do a classic rings into clouds. Fractal just puts out raw voltage. Fractal no quantize. So, you need that. We're gonna give ourselves 2 rings, and we're gonna put them in red mode, because I like it better. I have already got reverb enabled, that's good. And we're gonna give them both volt per octaves from the quantizer and send them out. Lovely rings will strum itself whenever it changes notes, so I don't need to worry about that yet. But our fractal generator also comes with accompanying triggers. It's essentially a copy of whatever clock you put in. So, I've taken the main 2. They're in the middle. I promise I will update the panels and make this more obvious. But your main 2 outputs for your horizontal X and your vertical Y components are these 2 CV outputs here. The ones above them are a shift register. It's a single stage shift register, but with this knob here, you can choose how many steps behind that shift register is, giving you a total of 4 CV outputs, and then an associated trigger to go with each of them, so we can strum those with the triggers we get from our outputs. These triggers differ from the clock in one way. If you're very close to 0, or if the next note in the sequence is very close to the current note in the sequence, as in close enough that it wouldn't quantize to a different note, then it won't put out a trigger. I find that to be musically useful, to not hit the same note too many times in a row, you know? And because you can trigger anything with anything, you can do it anyway if you want to. This will just leave those alone. So, what a nice setup. Then, our main clock input. This will clock both axes at once. Yay, nothing's quantized. Ta-da, it's like pretty and shit. Oh no, I cussed. Whatever, I don't care. This clock clocks the whole system evenly. You can also step individually with the clock. This will step X and Y, both, no matter what. This main clock again clocks both of them. This one only clocks the Y-axis independently. Notice now they're a bit out of phase. So you can clock those a little differently and actually get different harmonies out of it. Or you can just set it up with rhythm. And now you automatically have a nice little counterpoint harmony going. Isn't that friggin' nice? What do I want to do next? The reset button. It resets, you know. It puts both of them back to 0. That's fine, we get that. Reverse, toggles, and it'll run the sequence backwards. You can go backwards, forwards. It is asking, all of these inputs actually are only asking for a voltage to go upwards from less than to more than 1 volt. That's it. Which means that you can clock this with anything, including an oscillator. You should try that if you want. We can sequence both axes independently. We can reset the thing also choose your starting point and the length of your sequence, anywhere from 1, really, that's not 0, it's 1, to 64. So every single location you pick can be up to a 64-step sequence. And you can pick from anywhere in those 64 steps to start the sequence, and it will safely loop around in a nice little circle. So you could choose an 8-step sequence, and then you could move to a different part. And I haven't moved anything else. I've just changed where in the sequence I start from. Right? Very cool, very cool. These also have associated inputs, so you can control the start and end length. They cap themselves and take the absolute value, so I think if you get negative voltages, it will still go upwards, it flips around, More movement stuff. Alright. So, I've picked a location in the soil. Let's say I've got it right here to this nice solid triangle. Now, I want to zoom in on that spot, but that's not where my movement is. My move of the fractal is right here in the middle. So if I zoom in, I'm going to go there, and notice how my sequence gets all morphed, because its location on the fractal map itself is technically changing. This little button with the arrow up takes whatever location you've chosen and maps it to the move knobs, automatically centering your sequence on the screen. That means you can zoom in right on that area, and now you can hear what zoom is doing. When you zoom in, it does in fact actually expand the sequence a bit. I'm thinking maybe someday I'll add a CV input for this, because actually, wow, I really liked how that sounded. Dang. So that, very nice, very convenient. You can take wherever you pick and send it to the knob so you can zoom straight in on it. This little arrow going back takes whatever you have centered in the screen and copies it over to your mutations. Remember, when you're not at 0, the fractal changes shape. This is leading to something, I promise. Click that button, and now your mutagens knob copies your move knob. This is an automatic Julia picker. Every fractal, not even every fractal, every single point on any fractal has its own unique Julia set. And by picking a point, centering it, and sending it to your mutagens knob, you can now click the Julia button and have a unique Julia set based on that chosen location that you can now fully explore as if it is its own fractal. So let's go back out, and let's maybe go over here. Yeah, that's like a 5-pointed something or other. And then let's click that button, and now we've centered it, and then we click this button, and now that's copied over to what's centered, and then we Julia, and now we have a brand new Julia fractal that we can still mutate and still change around, and then move around in independently like it's its own fractal. Julia sets are like gravity wells. Notice it, like, let's turn the lights off. It really wants to stay in this area, kinda no matter where we are, until we're fully outside the fractal. But all the ways that it sits in that area are just a little different. So you get these small little variations. I really think this fractal generating thing would be great for microtonal music. But yeah. The Julia sets are amazing and infinite for every one of the 6 fractals that I have given you. This is Mandelbrot at 0 of it. We'll show you why it's called that by going all the way over to this little needle here and zooming in on it. And as you can see, it comes up. There's a bunch of these like boats, and this one especially looks like a boat. It's kind of on fire. The burning ship. That's why it's called that. But that's such a tiny, tiny thing hidden in the minutiae of the fractal. This one's a lot more chaotic and very lopsided. This one isn't symmetrical like the other. Third, we have what I call Beetle-Brot. This, I don't know, I kind of came up with it, but it's also sort of a copy of a different equation. It's using sinusoids, and it's very similar to the Mandelbrot, except all the places where you find those steady shapes have a much bigger area to move around with. Like, that's a lot of triangle right there that'll all give me slightly different variations in output. Very fun, very fun. Fourth is what I call Bird. I also came up with it. It's kind of a variation on the burning ship, but it looks like a bird. The fifth one is Daisy-Brot. Note that it's labeled high CPU. This probably, using this one, poppy fields would take about 9% on the performance meters, all by itself. Yeah, 8 to 9%, all by itself for that one. But it's got a lot of really interesting detail in it. And then Unicorn or Unicron. It's a fun misspelling. I don't know, I did it on purpose. Again, close to Mandelbrot, but like exploded. And again, every single one of these has the infinitely explorable Julia sets, so I don't think anyone can ever get bored by looking at the outputs of this. And again, the minute differences, I really think someone exploring microtonal music would really like this. Alright, where am I? We've gone through the set of fractals. We've gone through how there are 64 steps. We've moved through all the knobs and set our Julias. That's super cool. Right here, this invert button inverts around the middle of the range all of your outputs. Right now, my range, which you get independently for your X and Y, but not independently for the shift register, right? Both of your X's get put to the same range and both your Y's get put to the same range. But you have unipolar positive 2 volts as a range. You have plus or minus 2 volts as a range. And you have plus or minus 5 volts as a range. I usually kind of like plus or minus 2. And so in unipolar, that'll flip the voltages around 1 volt. But in bipolar, it will flip them around 0, of course, because it flips them around the middle of their range. That flips both of your outputs on the output side. This other button over here, called Mirror Y, takes whatever location, the Y-axis that you've picked on your soil knob, or your soil input, and flips it. This flips it on the input side, so that is actually visible on the screen. Notice the X output doesn't change here, because your horizontal result is still going to be the same thing. But you can easily flip your Y. This is extra interesting when you're using a fractal that is not vertically symmetrical. Fun stuff. These inputs control things, so honestly, let's get a little bit of that going, you know? Let's get me LFO. No, not that one. That's not the one I wanted. Do I have to look it up? I thought I favorited it. Whatever, we get another cameo. Don't look into it too hard. It's chaos. Let's slow it way down. And move this stuff around. Movement. Yeah. It's all deterministic. There's there's nothing random about this. But when you move it randomly, you still get randomness out of it. But if you give it the same voltage, you'll get the same results. Infinite deterministicness. Continuing, we have smooth and their associated inputs for the X and the Y. This is based on the average time of the clock input to give you from no slew to pretty close to triangular slew, regardless of how fast or slow you're going. Oh, hear it swooping around? Yeah, but it's exponential, so it doesn't really become terribly noticeable until about here, especially when you're quantizing it. But you have internal slew for your output, so if you're using this for pure modulation, you can get an almost smooth modulation by slewing the outputs. And I think, finally, we have our auxiliary output. This auxiliary output has several modes. So, how do I want to go about this? Let's go back down to one voice. Ooh, that went up a scale a little bit. I like that. Okay, so, auxiliary. The first mode's being controlled by this button here, is sum. This literally just adds together your main X and Y CV outputs. So they're added together now. That means also that I could do something like this. And now every time that clock hits, you get, it's like automatic transposing, right? You could do like chord progressions with this. So you're clocking this, let's say so that's eighth note, we're gonna get 8 of those in a bar. So let's go down to 8 steps. And let's transpose it up so it's easier to hear. And let's stop moving everything around. See, every time the Y clock hits, it transposes the sequence a little bit because it's adding the two of them together. So you get the same little sequence, but transposed. It's like automatic progression generator. Ta-da. Second mode, magnitude. This gives you the absolute value, always positive magnitude from like the distance from the center point of wherever you are in your sequence. So it takes your XY and condenses them into a size to give you a singular output. It's a little less mobile, and of course it's always positive, so it's going to give you higher voltages in general. Our third mode is centroid. This mode takes all the sequence from, well, however many steps you have allowed, and averages all of that together to give you the like centermost average value of this whole sequence. So as we move around, that average changes, and because that's running all the time, that actually also changes smoothly as you move this around. This is not a stepped voltage. It can move suddenly and kind of wildly because fractals can be chaotic and unpredictable, but it's a lot smoother of a voltage. I think this one is also it's not always positive. This is a bipolar voltage. It gives you just the straight up average. And then, finally, this obviously isn't going to do anything here, but we have a beginning of cycle output. So, whenever your cycle repeats, it will put out a trigger here. That's really good for syncing things up with your things. So what I could actually do here is take that there, so we're getting a nice little sequence. And then actually only clock that with the trigger reset. Well, I should quantize it first. That's all the modes for your auxiliary output. I think that's 4 or 5. 1, 2, 3. Only 4 modes. I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 modes. I can count. And I think that's it. So, let's get us a little bit of clouds going here. Because we just can't help ourselves. What would we do without clouds? I sure don't know. Ooh. This is why I added Buddha brought for that right there. Look at those fun little swirls. This, by the way, is Julia mode in Beetlebrat. Buddhabrat visuals. It makes these fun little rings. Note that the normal way doesn't really look like much of anything. There's a lot of weird stuff in there, sometimes. But often, it kinda doesn't really look like anything's happening. Except that all of this is happening. That's why this visual mode is important. Still doesn't explain what it is. Again, look that up on your own. But I believe that's all I have. Poppy fields. It makes fractals. Those fractals make sequences. Those sequences can get pretty weird. Again, these are also only looking for a voltage to rise above 1 volt. So you can clock it with anything. Try using it like a weird noise voice. Add some slew for filtering. Do weird stuff. I'd love to see some people do some weird stuff with this. Pretty please. Thank you very much. This has been ASMR Tutorials.